Hey, welcome everybody to Hope for Our Times and our midweek update. Man, I have a outstanding guest, someone that you all love and love to hear from, joining us in just a second. But check out this bit of news. Oracle's Larry Ellison wants to unify all of America's data and DNA into AI data centers to be studied and mitigate people's lives in a dystopian nightmare. Citizens, get this, says Ellison, will be on their best behavior because we're constantly recording and reporting. Wow. So my guest today is Britt. He's the founder of End Times Bible Prophecy, a platform dedicated to exploring current events through the lens of biblical prophecy. Through his books, digital content, monthly newsletter, he emphasizes the relevance of Bible prophecy in today's world, and ultimately the real purpose is in knowing Jesus Christ and pointing to him. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Britt, for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Man, this is going to be an outstanding program. Our viewers absolutely love you and what you are doing. And by the way, don't forget, everybody, to check out everything that Britt has. You can go over to his website. You can also connect with him at Substack. And we're going to be getting into many questions with you, including what Larry Ellison has to say. But first of all, Britt, how can people connect with you?
Well, the best place to find me is at brittgillette.substack.com. There you can find all the videos I do, all of the articles I put out. There's notes, there's links to interviews such as this one. So that's the best place to find me, and they can directly connect with me there as well.
Fantastic. I absolutely love what you're doing and what you've been doing. And I mean, you don't look it, but I've been reading your articles for a long, long time, way before we ever even met. You must, I'm convinced you started writing when you were 10 years old or something. But all right, so we have a lot to talk about. These comments from Larry Ellison, very intriguing. You've been writing about those things for a long time. But we're going to start here. Let's start with the economy. So you've been talking a lot about a global deflationary spiral that we're seeing, especially in countries like China and Germany. Do you think this could be a sign of something bigger, maybe the fulfillment of some biblical prophecy?
Well, I believe it may not be a direct fulfillment of Bible prophecy, but I believe we're set up for the greatest economic and financial crisis in the history of the world. We've talked before about all the things that are just on the cliff's edge of falling over and causing massive problems throughout the global markets. And we're seeing this global depression, this deflationary spiral play out in many countries around the world. You mentioned China, the second largest economy in the world. It's estimated by Barclays that $18 trillion in wealth has been lost in the Chinese property market since 2021. That's 50% more than we saw in America during the great financial crisis and the subprime housing crisis. So they're in the midst of a huge deflationary spiral. For those that don't know, that's what happened during the Great Depression. It's this debt implosion that feeds on itself, and it causes a cascading array of bankruptcies that shrinks the currency supply and then causes more bankruptcies. It just feeds on itself until it reaches the right market equilibrium, and then you can experience growth again. But it's a very terrifying thing to central bankers. They do what they can to try to stop it. But I believe we're really at a point where we're hitting peak debt all across the world. In the aftermath of the great financial crisis, the governments and central banks of the world, they printed up more debt than we've ever seen before to try to hold off the deflationary spiral at that time. Now the bill is coming due, and there's going to be really no way out of this for those central bankers. And I believe that ultimately what we're going to see is they're going to propose the solution as this mark of the beast infrastructure system that I like to point out is going to primarily be central bank digital currencies, tokenized assets, and digital IDs. So that's why we see all these stories where they're prepping us for those things. They're rolling those things out right now. And I believe they will say, well, but this wouldn't have happened if we had had such a system in place. Think back in the great financial crisis, we saw Bernie Madoff was exposed as running what then was the largest Ponzi scheme in the world. Now we may find it's the US government with some of the revelations we're seeing from Doge. But when something like that happens again and people lose their retirement savings as a result of that, it will be an easy sell to come to them and say, we could avoid something like that in the future, because central bank digital currency, if we had had that, well, Bernie Madoff, we would have known that he used your funds to buy a yacht instead of stocks and bonds. And so they'll push this as a greater regulatory authority over the fraudsters, over people that would take advantage of you, as a way to be able to replace lost assets. And unfortunately, many people will have no choice but to walk right into that trap. But again, that's not the mark of the beast itself. That comes during the tribulation. But all of this would set up and create lay the foundation, put the infrastructure in place for the mark of the beast system to be taken advantage of or implemented during the tribulation.
I find it so fascinating. So with China invented paper currency back. It was brought into the Western mindset through Marco Polo. So how many centuries ago was that? So when you look at what we have now, this paper currency, you go all the way back in the Western world, or in the rest of the world, you go back to the days of Marco Polo, and China already had it. So that's an easy sell for people to say, to hear, look how old this system is. It is so old that this has been around for centuries. And then also, as we're seeing what's being exposed with Doge, it's like, how many people are going to say, look, we can't trust the Bernie Madoffs. We can't trust the politicians. Look what they have done to all of our taxpayers' funds. I believe people are going to jump on board with it and say, yes, we can't trust anybody, but you can trust technology. I mean, we're totally being set up for it. I'm going to ask you to maybe define something for me. When I was younger, after my dad left the tech industry, this goes back 60 years, he left there, he went into the financial industry. So growing up over the years, we get lectures at dinner time, similar to some of the things that you talk about. And I remember him talking about inflation. He goes, deflation is going to become the bigger problem in the future. Can you explain the difference between inflation and deflation? Because people don't hear much about deflation, but deflation Sure. is what you're talking about now, and it's a huge problem.
Yes, I'll do my best. So inflation is essentially an inflation of the currency supply, and deflation is a decrease in the currency supply. So you talked about the difference between currency and money. So money would be a store of value. So historically, gold and silver, copper coinage, those were monies throughout the centuries. But this idea of paper claims on those metals, and now there's just the paper claims themselves, that's what we have now as currency. And since Nixon closed the gold window and ended the convertibility of the dollar into gold back in August 1971, the entire world has operated on this fiat currency system. There's never another time in human history prior to that where that was the case. You had certain governments that might have the fiat currency, but there was a safe haven you could go to. So for instance, Weimar Germany had hyperinflation when they printed their paper currency following World War I. But the British pound, the US dollar, those were still convertible to gold. And so Germans could get other currencies that retained their value to hold. Well, we aren't in that type of situation anymore where there's no safe haven to go to when what happens when all these fiat currencies collapse at once, which I think is ultimately coming on the other side of the crisis we see, where governments simply print their currencies into oblivion. And they'll do that by saying, well, the situation's so dire, people need a stimulus check to pay for their groceries. And so they'll send $1,000 checks to everybody. But then, of course, what that's going to do would be to cause inflation of groceries. So then they'd say, well, now they need $2,000 checks and $3,000 checks. And it goes on. And we have hyperinflation. But deflation is the greater threat we face right now. because deflation is basically when the you start seeing defaults on debts. So prior to the Great Depression, we saw the Federal Reserve blow this huge credit bubble that we know as the Roaring Twenties. Everybody thought it was wonderful, but it was based on this increase in credit and currency supply that led to bubbles in the stock market, bubbles in certain areas of real estate and farmland. And when no more debt could be taken on, then you started to see individuals and businesses default. And when they default, it actually shrinks the currency supply. And so as that currency supply shrinks, it becomes harder to find the cash you need, the currency you need to pay off existing debts, which makes it harder for those who haven't yet defaulted on their debts to acquire the currency they need. And then they end up defaulting, and it shrinks the currency supply further. So in a nutshell, that's what deflation is. It's this, and it creates this very dire spiral where, again, people cut back, people lose their jobs, they cut back on spending, and then those businesses that were dependent on their spending, they start to cut employees back, and on, and it feeds on itself until you reach that equilibrium in the free market economy where growth can occur again. But I think in this next downturn, it's going to be so severe that their response to it is to simply print the currency, as I talked about before, hand checks over to everyone to avoid revolution in the streets. And when they do that, I believe that that's when we hit a hyperinflation standpoint. And I think we see central bank digital currencies come into play because they can manipulate those. They can program central bank digital currency and make it so that, well, you face penalties if you spend it now, or you face penalties if you don't spend it now. This is the type of control that they want. And unfortunately, I think that'll be an easy sale for a world that's in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, when people start getting in trouble, they're looking for a solution. You start having wars that people don't want anymore. They cry out for peace and safety. You start having economic disaster. We just need a fix to this. Everybody's poor. I mean, what a perfect world is being set up to fulfill the things that the Bible talks about, including a leader that's going to arise, that's going to be the one that's going to be much more pleasing to everybody, more of the masses. Those on the left and those on the right are going to say, finally, we have somebody who has a solution to all of these problems. Very interesting. Looking at this also, what I see coming because of everything you're talking about is also a perfect setup for something you've written about and talked about many times before, UBI, or Universal Basic Income, to help fix the problem. We'll just distribute equally, and you see that as also coming with this the disaster that's ahead?
Yeah, definitely. And especially when we see artificial intelligence continuing to mature and the impact that that could have on the job market, that could come very rapidly and suddenly and lead to that's deflationary in and of itself. And so you're going to have a mass number of unemployed people that are looking to figure out how they're going to survive. And so politicians, rather than face the wrath of those people, are going to do everything they can to try to make sure that they hold back a revolution. And if that means printing the currency and handing it out, there's no doubt they'll do that. They've been doing that. They're just going, what we saw, I think, during the pandemic with all the stimulus checks, the mortgage deferments, student loan deferments, all the different things that were proposed and done, I think is just a microcosm of what's to come.
As we look at things and we have a new administration, how does the Trump administration compare to previous administrations when it comes to their approach to CBDCs and digital IDs?
Well, Trump has come out and said no to central bank digital currency. But the problem is we aren't in a crisis now, right? At least they aren't aware that we're in a crisis now. We are definitely in a crisis. But Trump is one man who's in office for 4 years. And we've seen the world's central banks rolling out testing and pilot programs, in some cases, actually rolling out central bank digital currency. This is a push that's been going on for quite some time. And I don't see that stopping simply because the Trump administration's come into office. And in fact, the Trump administration, excuse me, I'm recovering from the flu, so I might have a slight cough there. But the Trump administration has a number of transhumanist and technocrats from Silicon Valley within it that think we should have central bank digital currency. In fact, Elon Musk came out and advocated for putting government spending on the blockchain so that it would be more transparent. But of course, that implies that there's some sort of digital currency attachment to that, some sort of digital link between that government spending in order for that to happen. And so I think we're seeing this push has been going on for quite some time. There's no sign that it's going to let up. We're seeing the digital IDs rolled out all around the globe, Australia, Europe. There's 14 states in the United States that have issued their own digital IDs right now. TSA is using those at airports and actually using facial scans in order to verify those. And they claim, oh, well, as soon as we scan your face, then the next passenger, it's erased from the database, right? And
I didn't know they said that.
yeah, it's erased from the database because there was a bipartisan group of senators that came out and said, this is an invasion of privacy. This could be a surveillance nightmare. And they said, oh, no need to worry. We erase these. And I think, no, they don't. What's the point of taking the picture
no kidding.
to begin with if you're going to erase it? So we're seeing these elements of the system rolling out all across the Western world, for sure, all across the globe. There's plans in place for this. It gives the people who are in power now control, and they know the system's coming to an end. They understand the crisis that we're facing economically. So this is the new system that will cement their power forever. But they've got to get from here to there. So they're going to try to hold off the collapse as long as they can, because there's no guarantee they'll retain that power. But this is the system they designed in order to remain in power and cement that power. And that's exactly what it is. It's a totalitarian system, and there's no escape from it. Once we enter this, there's no escape other than Jesus Christ and his return.
Amen. Jesus himself saying, pray that you may escape all these things. Revelation 13 also teaches that there's going to be no escape from the system that is coming, which takes me to our opening article with Larry Ellison from Oracle. Wants to unify all of America's data and DNA into AI data centers to be studied and mitigate people's lives in the dystopian nightmare. His quote, citizens will be on their best behavior because we are constantly recording and reporting. All right, with this, I mean, so much talk about AI is advancing, obviously, at a rapid pace. Do you believe I guess it's do they line up with biblical prophecies about things happening suddenly? I think the rapture is going to happen suddenly. I believe the world's going to be changed, but this whole system, it's here, but it's not officially set up yet. It's not been rolled out yet, but we can see it everywhere. I go into airports all the time. It's just part of what, so I can't imagine they've ever eliminated my face from any database, because every time I walk up to anything, they know who I am. By the time, I mean, they call me up. They look at my face and say, Mr. Hughes, come on up here. And I haven't even been anywhere yet. So we're in it, but this whole approach, it appears to me that it's going to suddenly come into place. Is that, do you think that's an accurate thought on that?
Yes, I think so. I think and when you look at the power of exponential change, I think a lot of people fail to recognize our minds tend to think in a linear fashion. We think step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But let's say that you have a technology that's doubling every year for 10 years. That's exponential change. Well, half of all that change in that 10-year period occurs in the final year. So that's think of the shock that creates. And early on, it appears, relatively speaking, that almost nothing's happening. And so we see that now with all of the buzz around AI. And when they rolled out ChatGPT a couple of years ago, you heard all these people saying, oh, AI is going to change the world. All these people are going to lose their jobs. And now you see things like, well, Apple discontinued the use of their AI assistant in the UK because it was messing up news articles. It couldn't even regurgitate the news article correctly. And people say, so this is going to displace people from their jobs? Well, not now, but we're in the early innings of that. But this exponential change is going to reach an inflection point where it does, and the changes are very sudden, very rapid. And I think this encompasses every aspect of society. This technology weaves through the fabric of everything we do. And so as we approach that point, as we move up that exponential curve, we're going to see more and more and more change. And what's interesting is if you were to plot labor pains on a chart, it would look like an exponential curve, because you see those labor pains increase in frequency and intensity as you draw closer and closer to the point of birth. Well, Jesus actually likened the time right before his coming to labor pains. So we're seeing this right now. He was pointing to the exponential curve. He's pointing to these types of radical changes that we're seeing now, these global shocks. They're going to be more frequent in nature as time goes by. We're going to see more and more of them.
It's so fascinating to watch everything develop. It's gradually and then suddenly. And it also, as I just think of all of the ways that the Bible prophecies of the second coming of Christ are going to be fulfilled, just like you said, like birth pangs. They're coming. You've mentioned the potential job displacement of AI. What advice do you have for those who might be concerned about the impact of those changes on their careers?
Well, just be very vigilant as much as you can. Understand your role, maybe how this technology might impact your industry or your job itself. Do everything you can to avoid debt as much as possible. Try to build up savings. I tell people to have a deep pantry. Those are good ideas. Those can always help you in a pinch. So just do everything you can to put yourself in as best financial position as you can, to be as resilient as you can. Think of ways to diversify your income. That's, I think that's just the best advice I have. Everybody's situation is going to be different, so it's kind of hard to give a one-size-fits-all approach. But that's what I would do. Be as resilient as you can.
Yeah, you want to build up a hedge against the problems that we know are coming. I think of Joseph had wisdom. God had given him a dream, and he understood what was coming. There's going to be a famine in the land, and he's able to approach that rightly. We have God's word that tells us what's coming, and we can read the news, and they tell us it's coming. It just so happens that it matches the Bible. Therefore, we really ought to pay attention, because we don't know when we're going to be raptured. Of course, we could be raptured tomorrow, but we might be here for a while still. So it's always better to live in wisdom. As we talk about digital systems and economic shifts, how do you see the connectedness of the global economy affecting us, and how might this play into Bible prophecy?
Well, we see the whole world is connected, so there's no local economies. The world has completely changed over the last several centuries. And we see it now where we're all interdependent on one another. So it's impossible, as I said before, for China to have this deflationary spiral where $18 trillion worth of property values have evaporated in 4 years. And yet, the United States is immune to that. No, our economies are dependent on one another. And so when we see the extent of those problems, it becomes global in nature. We read in Revelation 6 about this mass global famine that takes place. with famines in the past at the time that was written would have been local in nature. But now we can see how global and interconnected everything is. Think back again to the pandemic and the supply chain issues that we faced. Think of the war in Ukraine and the dislocations that caused with agricultural commodities. And so we can see how one part of the world can have a complete outsized effect on another part of the world. And I think that tells us the times in which we live.
Britt, as I look at the times in which we live and I read my Bible, when I look at it, it's kind of like you can't unsee these things. Yet there's so many pastors and people who go to church who just ignore these things. Why do you think that is?
I have no idea. I don't know how you can miss them. I don't know if it's a spiritual blindness or a willful blindness, because it's easier sometimes to ignore reality because then you don't have to prepare for some of the things that we're talking about. But I would think that Christians and pastors in particular would be looking for, we were commanded by Jesus to watch, to be alert, to stay awake, and to watch for these signs. And Jesus, if you remember his first coming, he pointed out to the Pharisees, he said, you point to the sky and you see the signs in the sky and you say, well, the weather's going to be in a particular way as a result of the sky. Yet you've totally missed the signs of the times. You don't recognize my coming, because they should have known all of the messianic prophecies, including those that pointed to that specific period of time in which the Messiah would appear. And yet they totally missed Jesus. And so I think Jesus, he was talking not just to that generation, but our generation as well. He's saying, just as you can look in the sky and know what the weather's going to be, these signs, you should be looking around you. Of course, Jesus says in Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21, when you begin to see all these things take place, know that I'm near, I'm right at the door. He's talking about not just the things he was talking about, but things the prophets talked about regarding the end times. So we're starting to see the stage setting. We've been seeing the stage setting for many of these end times events in our day and time. And that should make everybody sit up straight and say, Jesus is coming back. I don't know exactly when, but this is the season he said to look for. And he said that he's right at the door when we see these things, and we see these things.
Amen. It's even in Mark chapter 13 where Jesus says to his disciples, in all of it, discourses, Mark records it, Jesus says, what I say to you, I say to all, watch. And it's to all to watch. And I also think of the prophecy. So people tend to say, well, when they look at Bible prophecy, even pastors, they'll say, oh, you're talking about the second coming of Christ kind of things. We don't deal with that. We don't deal with Israel. We don't deal with that. Because they've categorized it. Bible prophecy is linear and meant to be looked at that way. You go all the way back to the Garden of Eden, and you have the prophecy of the Messiah who's going to come way back in the Garden of Eden. You fast forward from there, you have prophecies regarding the nation of Israel, the Messiah that's going to come, Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Greece. You have all of these prophecies, the Roman Empire, the birth of Christ, and then all of a sudden these pastors will say, and we stop there. Oh, wait a minute! It's linear. It goes like you were saying earlier. How we should look at it in this case is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Well, we only go to 7. We stop after the birth of Jesus, and we don't go beyond that. But that isn't, Bible prophecy is all of it, and it's all about Jesus, and it all connects with his first coming and his second coming. But it is amazing how many pastors just stop right there. He came, he ascended to heaven, and we don't look any further. But that's certainly not what God intended. It's just astounding to me, I guess I would say.
Yeah, you're not alone. I feel the same way.
With digital IDs and CBDCs, let me ask you this first, Britt. Again, how can people connect with you? I want to make sure they go and check out everything they have.
All
Everything
right,
you have.
the best way is to go to brittgillette.substack.com. There they can find articles I've written, videos that I've done on all of these topics and more.
And he has a lot. I get something for Britt every day, almost every day. With digital IDs and CBDCs gaining traction, what concerns do you have about the erosion of privacy in our individual freedom?
Well, I mean, it's completely gone as they roll those things out. There's, you know, half of every transaction in the economy involves some sort of currency. And so if we enter an era of central bank digital currency where the government has insight into that currency, they have insight into all those transactions, and they're trying to tokenize all of the things that you would buy with that currency, meaning they're trying to digitize everything in the physical world as well. So there really will be nothing you can transact with that won't be an open book to the people in power. And that means there's no escape from what they want to do to you. And again, central bank digital currency, unlike, say, credit cards or debit cards, you're talking about programmable currency, and that means they can individually instruct it to do different things for different people. They could say, well, we don't like what Tom said on the internet last week, so Tom, your currency can only be used within the place where you live, a mile of where you live, right? So no getting on airplanes for you. You're not going anywhere. Well, and so they can program everything into that. They could go say, well, you bought too much ice cream last month. Now you can only buy broccoli. I mean, they can really they can really micromanage every aspect of your life. There's nothing that's off limit to what they could do. And again, there would be no escape from this. There's no way to really opt out of the system once it's fully adopted by all of society.
And this goes back to the opening article with Larry Ellison. This is really exactly what he means when he says citizens will be on their best behavior because we're constantly recording and reporting. There's no escape. So in 1991, in fact, I think I even have this quote here. This is Club of Rome. I know you are familiar with this. Club of Rome's book they had out in 1991 called The First Global Revolution. Their quote, in searching for a common enemy against whom we can unite. So common enemy we, the Club of Rome, the globalists, the elite can unite against. We came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill. All these dangers are caused by human intervention and natural processes, and it is only through changed attitudes and behavior that they can be overcome. Therefore, the real enemy is humanity itself. And so it's like it's everything we're seeing, from the climate laws to they're using everything against us and going the direction that Larry Ellison says. Okay, you have the Trump administration. He's surrounded himself with some technocrats that are in there. My personal belief with some of these guys, they probably think they're doing good for humanity, but regardless of what they think, the Apostle Paul, before he became Paul, when he was Saul, he was persecuting the Christians. He thought he was doing good. He thought he was doing God's work for God's glory. And I think a lot of these people probably think they're doing good for humanity, but they're really doing this bidding of what we see coming in with this final empire.
Yeah, I agree. I think they think they're doing what's right, but again, it's yes, and you look at what some of the work that's going on right now. Yes, we want to see this corruption come to an end. We want to see these frauds exposed. But what's going on in Washington, D.C. right now is a revolution. And oftentimes we find in revolutions, people are very quick to overthrow the established order, but they haven't thought so much about what replaces it. And what I would like to see replace it is nothing. Freedom, right? Freedom and liberty. But you don't see a big push for that necessarily. You see, well, let's Let's put the government spending on the blockchain. Let's create these new systems. Let's put AI in control over where we had a bunch of employees before. Let's put these new systems in rather than let's just eliminate those systems altogether and just have freedom and liberty. And so, we don't know what will come out of this revolution, but history tells us that very rarely is it one like the American Revolution where we see less government. It's usually just a different form of government and a different form of tyranny. And so, unfortunately, that's what history tells us. I'd like to see differently, but we also know the times in which we live. And so we know that that's what's coming one way or another.
Yeah, and we know we really won't have that kingdom we dream of until Jesus comes back. Men are deceitful and wicked. The Bible tells us that. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, whether they're rich or poor. All men need Christ. As we see the rise in technology, it is coming so fast. You talk about this all the time. I would imagine by the end of this year, we are looking at some rather significant changes that are coming. That's my guess, just looking at the speed that things are coming. At the same time, you have China that says, hey, we've got DeepSeek, right? Regardless of what the Trump, Elon and his team are coming up with, was it Stargate? Regardless of these different plans, China has theirs. Every country is vying for theirs, but this is all going to eventually come down to one system, correct?
Yes, absolutely. Back in 2017, Vladimir Putin said that exact same thing. He was speaking to a bunch of graduates at a local university, and he said the leader in the field of AI will be ruler of the world.
Wow.
So that was openly being discussed back then, well over eight years ago, or 7 years ago, but guys, that is the case. Whoever is the leader in this technology will be ruler of the world. And I think that that's the way that this is setting up. We won't know until it happens. But I think that when you look at the trends in technological development and what the Bible says about these times, you can see very clearly how quickly a global government could be established and a global government could be administered. Because you really could have a system where one person using AI could control every aspect of humanity. We're not far from that at the rate that we're going. Of course, that's what the Bible tells us is going to happen, is the Antichrist will rule over all peoples, nations, tribes, and languages. So we're heading for that time right now, and I think these are just steps along the way.
It's rapidly coming, and we can see leaders racing to the top. To be the one to get there, as Putin said. I couldn't remember what year that was that he said it, so that was 2017. Wow, here we are. Britt, how can believers find hope in a world that seems to be unraveling, especially in the light of Bible prophecy?
Well, the only way you can find hope is through Jesus Christ. So, guys, Jesus gives a peace that surpasses all understanding. He gives a peace that the world cannot give. We should be keeping our eyes fixed on him in these times. Now, we watch all of these signs because Jesus commanded us to watch. He commanded us to be alert and to stay awake. But ultimately, Revelation tells us that the essence of all prophecy is to give a clear witness for Jesus Christ. So our eyes should be fixed on Jesus. Jesus is our comforter in these times with all the turmoil that we're seeing. When the storms of life come, he is the rock. So that's where our focus should be.
Amen. Again, when I think of Bible prophecy, all Bible prophecy from Genesis all the way to the end of the book of Revelation, we remember that the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of Bible prophecy. It's all about Jesus, from old to new and to old to present to what is still to come. And it is our opportunity to tell others about Christ. Britt, it was through Bible prophecy that I eventually came to know Christ, because I found it so interesting as I was looking at things and watching things and found out, hey, the Bible talks about this. And that was way back. Now you have to completely disregard it and just pretend like these things aren't happening. Just amazing to be living right now. Britt, we've covered a lot of territory today. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with our viewers?
Sure. I would say, right now, don't fall asleep. Stay awake, stay alert. As I see in the aftermath of the election, especially here in the United States, a lot of people seem to think it's a better era because we have a new administration, one that isn't clamping down and trying to censor us on social media. And we don't see this type of tyranny that we've seen for the past few years. Because for many of the reasons we just talked about, don't take your eyes off of Jesus and understanding the times in which we live. Again, Jesus commanded us to watch for all these signs. We know the times that we live in. Things are not slowing down, they're speeding up. So make sure that you're doing what God has directed you to do in life right now, because none of us know how much time we have left, but all of us need to be focused like lasers and running the race as best we can. When you see the finish line, it's the time to sprint, not the time to slow down.
Amen. What kind of runner, when they see the finish line, would suddenly pull up a chair and say, I'll just wait till the finish line comes?
Right.
You run harder and faster. And also it's a reminder, I like to encourage people, because I'm afraid there's going to be a lot of people, a lot of believers who get to heaven, they're going to stand before the Lord, and they're going to say, I wish I had done more, when that reality sets in. And you don't want to be that person, everybody. You want to do what you can. And I want to encourage you all, again, connect with Britt if you don't already. Make sure that you see everything in the description there for connecting with Britt Gillette. Excellent Bible studies, excellent newsletters, has them out all the time. You'll be super blessed. Make sure you do that. We also appreciate it if you like, share, and subscribe to our channels. It really helps us to be able to get the word out there. God bless you, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Britt, thank you so much for joining me today, and we'll be praying for you. God bless.